So my apologies for my voice. I'm recovering from a sore throat. Today is the first day that it's actually better, so I'm actually very excited to be talking, finally. And I'm actually okay with this being the post-lunch session, because you're not going to have to look at YAML. You're not going to have to look at JSON or any code. This is really just going to be a talk about a story, an experience of mine, of just getting inspired for the work that I do. And so we don't really have a ton of time, so I'm just going to get right into it, and let's get started. So my inspiration started, let me make my head move over here. Yeah. Who here is familiar with Kent Beck's 3X talk? No? Perfect. OK, so I'm going to spend a lot of time setting some context here. So Kent Beck, the originator of test-driven development and author of JUnit, spent the last 7 or 8 years at Facebook, and he found that the way of working at Facebook was very different than how Agile and XP practices started in the beginning. And what he found was Facebook had this attitude around lots of experiments, lots of trying new things in order to see if there's some kernel of something that's valuable, and then taking that thing, scaling it. And so he talks about it in this graph that is, he says, explore, expand, and extract. And I'll just sort of walk over this, this graph for a few minutes here. So on the y-axis, we have payoff. And so that's sort of the actual value that you're getting out of that investment in work. So if you think of this explore phase, this is actually what we're trying to provide with Cloud Foundry. We want to give people that place, that playground to explore and try new things and see what resonates. These things really ought to be cheap. You don't want to spend too much money on an exploration. You really want to do your user-centered design research here. You're not going to be writing great code. This is going to be prototyping, lots of stuff to throw away. Going on the x-axis is sort of success. So what the heck does that mean? For me, that's more about time. And so you want these to also be as short as possible. It's not really a good exploration if it takes you 6 months. You want these to be really quick and dirty and to answer certain kinds of questions that you have, probing the market, figure out what resonates with customers. The expand phase is once you hit something, there's a kernel there that people latch onto and go, this actually looks really cool. How do we grow it? Here, our constraint now goes into more of a technical constraint and sort of a race against competition. So you want to grow your customer base. You want to grow your features. You want to grow from this thing that was sort of throwaway to something that's actually useful and marketable. You don't really have marketing involved here. You have marketing involved here to either both grow awareness and also grow the technical stack. This is where you encounter more technical limitations like servers, regions, availability zones. And then at the end is the extract phase. And this is a different phase compared to the beginning. And this is the type of work where you're going to be a little bit more risk aware. You don't want to lose this investment that you've spent doing numerous explorations, investing heavily in growing, and then having an asset that only lives for a year due to some kind of circumstances like market changes or just outright failure, which we'll get into in a bit. And so he talks about how a little bit of waterfall sometimes fits on this side, because you want to prepare for certain unforeseen consequences, and you want to mitigate them. You want to sort of plan against them and create some barriers to that. Whereas here, failure is fine. Failure is actually when you spend too long on a bad idea. And we'll revisit this graph a little bit. Just to expand on it, this graph has it's fractal in nature. It's not just a 1-year time horizon or a 5-year time horizon. You can see this in your day. You can see this as you spike out to technical implementation and say, hey, this is actually something I want to now have 5 teams in our organization use. So that's sort of the growth, and then maintain it so you're not churning on technological decisions. So you can sort of see this fractal nature in all the different places where you do a little bit of exploration, expanding, and extracting. When I first saw this talk, the thing that jumped out at me was that he always drew the graph in the same way. And it made me sort of think about, like, well, what does it look like if this graph composed itself in different ways? So at the top left here, actually all the top ones, you can sort of see those as that the cost of exploration is a lot higher than perhaps the ones that are in the middle row. You can also have a slow growth versus like an immediate growth in the top right. You can also have maybe a marginal gain if you look at the middle row left column, where it's like, yeah, it was a cheap experiment, but you didn't get the growth that you're hoping to get. And so how valuable is that asset over time? And then at the bottom, which my head is probably blocking, is like not a great scenario here where, yeah, you found something that resonated, but for some reason it tailed off and is no longer that valuable. You might have to make decisions on what you want to do with that thing, get rid of it, or do some kind of ROI analysis on it. But what I like to think I'm doing, and I'll get into what I do in a moment, is this. I want to see how long this can go. How long can you take an asset that's valuable and useful to your customers and extend it and get the most value out of it? Some people use the word exploit. I'm not a big fan of that word. I do like thinking of extract. It's trying to say, like, there's people that see value. Let's continue giving that value instead of having to force them to adapt all the time. So that resonates with me quite a bit. But how do you get that long line? Often there's sort of maintenance requirements. You can't really just have something and just assume entropy isn't going to take over and do its darndest to take it down. That be physical things, virtual things. You know that if you don't do anything with your infrastructure, for some reason, like we even use words like rot, bit rot, or some kinds of like decay, drift, and these are fully engineered systems that we've created, but they're complex and we can't control all the variables, and so things are eventually going to pick it apart. So maintenance is the process of preserving a condition. So if you have a valuable asset and a valuable system, how do you preserve it the way that it is so it continues providing value? And for me, like, this is CS Summit after all, so like you as a company may have experimented with different platforms, and Cloud Foundry was the one that you explored. Then you went to grow it. You talked to your internal stakeholders and your dev teams and said, wow, this actually resonates more than just one dev team. We can see this going to 100 dev teams, and that's how you scale and grow your platform at your organization. But then at some point, someone's gonna have to maintain it and keep it running and keep those people happy, because the shininess wears off after a little while. And so maintenance to me is the thing that sort of props up that top line. And without it, that top line starts falling down. You could argue that there's sometimes some downside risk tolerance that's totally acceptable. You can sort of picture these blocks shrinking over time because perhaps you do want to retire your platform. There's an end of life at some point. I just hope it's 5 years down the road, not 6 months. And so maintenance is one of the activities that you can do to keep that going. Cool. So yeah, dude, where the heck is this going? Get there in a second. So I work on a team that is doing platform engineering. This sort of covers a lot of the internal stuff within Pivotal, that we operate a platform. We operate a platform for Pivotal Tracker. If you're familiar with Pivotal Tracker, if you're not familiar with Tracker, it's a project management system similar to like Jira or Mingle or like those. It's a single tenant platform. So like so I know a lot of you are probably running platforms for much larger organizations. This is a very small one, but that's okay. Maintenance is still required if you're big or small. It's still valuable. But we are running a production system. We carry the pager for it. And it's I don't know how long Pivotal Tracker has existed for, but it's 10, 15 years maybe. So it's articulated its value, and it's still valuable, and we want to keep extracting that value. But there's some things that sort of work against maintenance. Prevention is a bit hard to see. You don't patch a system and then get notified by a hacker saying, I saw that you patched OpenSSL. I was about to hack you over the weekend, but I can't now. You don't get that kind of feedback with preventative type of work. The feedbacks are slow. You don't really know how all that maintenance actually impacts you. I like thinking of flossing as an interesting metaphor of maintenance. Is that you don't really get that immediate feedback when you floss, but you get that feedback when you go to the dentist and they say you haven't been flossing. So I make sure I floss because I don't want that feedback later on. And also sometimes the feedback is too late. If I'll use the dentist analogy again, is that if the dentist tells you that you have a cavity, well, flossing isn't going to fix that. Unfortunately, you're at a different state of maintenance where you actually need to repair and get a filling and then maintain that filling now for a while. And also, maintenance is never done. Maintenance is the type of work that is repetitive. As much as we love automation and removing the toil from our jobs, is that we're building new machines to perform that maintenance. And so who maintains the maintenance machines? And so it's never ending, but it's just hopefully we're changing the problem to be something better. So now to talk a little bit around motivation. And so there's a book by Daniel Pink called Drive. One slide doesn't really do it justice, but I do want to break down the 3 key factors that he articulates through the research that he's done, is that in order for someone to be really satisfied with the work that they do, they need autonomy, so not being told what to do, having some agency in what they do, some level of mastery, so the feeling of getting better at what you do, and purpose. For me, like this is sort of the thing that resonated with me, is that when I was seeing that Kent Beck graph, it made me, this is my happy place. It made me realize that I actually love maintaining stuff. I get satisfaction of having an old pair of jeans last me forever. I don't get as much satisfaction, and this is not to dismiss this type of work, but for folks who love building things and building new things, the people that love this explore loop, that's great. I'm glad there are people that love doing that. But this is my jam. I'm happy to see how cheaply I can keep that thing running for as long as possible, as long as it's still delivering value, of course, not just for the heck of it. So it's a bit of a blurry slide, but like, what does maintenance work look like in the day in the life of someone who's running a platform? A lot of it looks like number incrementing. It looks like, take this thing and bump up this patch version. Not super motivating. There's like a negative term for graphic designers, as back in the day it was like pixel pushers. I don't want to think of myself as a number incrementer. I'm more than that. And I'll talk at how to turn some of these types of stories into something a little bit more motivating so that your platform teams can actually enjoy the work that they do and be proud of the work that they do, and not just be seen as a ticket processor. So some of the things that work well with a lot of the things that we sort of struggle to do in the short term for long-term gains sometimes requires a little bit of psychological manipulation, or some people call it gamification. Gamification, of course, can be used for a lot of negative things. It's used to capture people in platforms so that they don't leave, make addictive types of workflows and streaks that you don't want to maintain. But of course, they can also be used for good. One of the ones that I really like is Don't Break the Chain that Jerry Seinfeld mentions, which is about developing a habit and doing something frequently and reoccurring. So for him, it was just about 30 minutes, I think, a day of writing some stand-up material. He just made sure he didn't break that chain. Of course, one of the negative ones here is this GitHub one. GitHub, I think, they removed, I think, this feature, the largest street kind of thing, because it actually incentivized people to work on weekends, which is sort of shows the power of sometimes of these very simplified gamification mechanics, where you have to be conscientious when using them because you don't want to nudge people to do things that are unhealthy for them. But in software development, we sort of naturally already had a don't break the chain type of behavior, which is don't break the build. If you ever go into an organization where the build is read frequently, it can be very frustrating. And there's some, I personally at least get a sense of pride of like keeping it green, keeping things healthy. I feel like a green build is like having a clean kitchen. It means that everything's in good order so I can actually cook a meal. Whereas a red build is like, my roommate just, I don't know, created a whole bunch of mess and I can't cook anything now because the kitchen's red. Or build is red. It doesn't mix too well. And yeah, so like habits are one part around making short-term decisions that are not obvious as healthy in the long term. So like whatever habits that you can develop to like get yourself to floss your teeth, or I have a habit of making sure I go for a walk every single morning before I start work. I work from home. That makes me healthier in the long run and a little bit more sane so that I don't get a little bit stir crazy. And the motivation there is simply gamification. I have stickies in my wall in my apartment that just has a little green dot, and I feel a little bit proud of myself. Now, okay, so talked a little bit about the psychology of motivation and a little bit about the maintenance needs that our infrastructure needs. How the heck does this all get put together? And I'll do a quick time check. Looking good, okay. So we've gamified some of our, actually, and let me sort of go back to here, like what we do in CloudOps. We have an OKR, so objectives and key results. One of our objectives is a maintenance objective. And it reads out like, as we will maintain a stable and secure platform for Pivotal Tracker, right? That's our objective. And so a key part of OKRs is having key results. So how do you measure? So I just said some fuzzy words, stable and secure. All right, cool. Well, what do those words mean? Is it completely locked down? Is it disconnected from the internet? Is it 100% stable? Well, let's talk about our metrics that we use to gauge that. So from a security stance, I know this is a bit of a graph explosion of this one, but one of our security stances is we will update our software frequently because we believe that the age of the software that's running in our system is correlated to the security risk of our system. So if we have like a VM that has been up for 350 days, we see that as a risk, not as a thing to celebrate. And so this is a graph of how patched our stem cells are for all these services. This is running on PCF, but even with Bosch deployed CFs, of course, you're gonna still have a stem cell. And here you can sort of see, I'll just use a random one. You can sort of see when they got patched as these ones sort of go down. There's a few gaps. That's just our metrics ingestion is not always quite on par. But if this continues, like this graph tells us what happens if we do absolutely nothing. If we do nothing, every day these graphs are going to increment higher and higher until we reach a threshold, which for our team we've said 30 days. So we don't want to have a stem cell that was released more than 30 days ago. So that's part of our security stance. And it's really fulfilling when our pipelines go through a stem cell upgrade and we see this thing rejig itself and all the graphs go down. Is it fair? Are we really secure? Well, that's up to our model to keep on assessing and figuring out like how secure does this actually make us. Of course, we can start working on other metrics as well. But this provides a little bit of visual feedback on when we upgrade a system, based on our model and declaration of our security stance to our stakeholders, we can say we're keeping this thing as fresh as possible. And part of that conversation is like, I'll go into the next metric in a bit. This is this is using Pivotal Cloud Foundry. So one of the package nomenclature there is a tile. And so this is just a version of the tiles that are on the platform. But same concept is there. Is like how old is that tile? And you can see that we're chomping on the bit for Google to release a new version of their Stackdriver nozzle tile. So this graph at first glance is telling me our Stackdriver nozzle software is old and hasn't been patched. And we're waiting for an upstream provider to release a new version. And we can also see that some Pivotal products haven't released a patch in a while. And so we say, hey, by the way, it's been a long time since you've released something. We would like to be able to exercise our ability to upgrade. Because the longer that thing goes without upgrading, the more anxious that we feel about upgrading. And so it sort of goes into the mastery component of what's motivating, is that as a platform team, you get to do things over and over and over again. And to me, that's exciting, because that's your opportunity to get better at it. If you'd only do something once, I keep on bugging people that keep on creating Cloud Foundry installers. Like, we've only needed to install Cloud Foundry 4 times on our team, but we've done over 1,000 upgrades. So that is a little bit more impactful for us, and it motivates me as a maintainer of something as well. And so the next graph here is we're following some of the SRE practices, especially around error budgets. And this is our metric that we use to determine whether or not we can change the system. Who here is familiar with SRE practices and error budgets? A little bit? Okay, most of the room. Cool. So this line is telling us how much downtime or customer pain have we introduced by updating the system so frequently. So this is an agreement that we've had with our stakeholders, is that we are, based on the security stance that we've discussed, well, that means for us to do frequent upgrades as well. You can't have one without the other. And so here's our way of deciding on how frequently we can upgrade. As long as we're below these budgets, we're free. So again, from the motivation standpoint, this gives us autonomy. We're not really being told when to deploy or not. We say, like, we've already had an agreement about this budget. And as long as you're within that, we understand what that means. And so we can continue our upgrade machine. What else do I have on this one? No, nothing. Yeah. So I love it when I can keep something up and running and keeping it up at that high payoff line. It makes me really sad to see something sort of devolve and become unused or unmaintained. Think of a lot of your favorite libraries or open source projects or tools or services that you use. And think about the times where you say, like, I don't really want to use that. It doesn't look like it's well maintained. What does that mean? Explore that a little bit. And what are the activities that you observe the people in those communities doing that you support? And do you see yourself doing those activities? Do you take any pleasure or value from doing those activities? Because if so, then maybe operations is your jam as well. And you'll be quite happy playing that fractal explore, expand, extract on different things. So for our team, like, we started with manual upgrades and we moved to automated upgrades. That was also, in our team, a small little explore, expand, and extract. And knowing where you sort of lie on on those dimensions really helps you with decision making and determining like what risks are. So if you're at the extract phase, you definitely want more tests. You want more better clean code. At explore, you don't care about that stuff so much. At growth, you're going to want people that are focusing on the technical problems and understanding computer science constraints at that point, because those problems are that big. But yeah, in summary, so like we talked a little bit about maintenance and what that looks like, but why do I have fun doing it? Well, I don't feel like I'm a ticket processing agent. I get to figure out how I solve the problems. Like I said earlier, our team has an OKR, which is around maintenance, which is we keep the platform stable and secure for our #1 tenant, which is Pivotal Tracker. That's it. We have agency to figure out what that looks like. Mastery, we are changing things all the time, and with every iteration and every sample, you get a learning experience. I don't think I'd feel like I'd be mastering our maintenance if we only upgraded once every 6 months. I would feel like I'm just setting myself for the next nightmare. And so by doing it weekly, automated, I get better at it, and I get better at seeing the different types of failure scenarios. Because yeah, things break all the time when you do it more often, but the failures are a little bit more manageable. You can actually reason about them, and they're not quite as scary. And purpose. I love the fact that we're keeping Tracker alive and healthy. We have, as the previous slide around the whole CloudOps domain, like we're providing feedback to the rest of Pivotal. We are exploring different practices and trying them out and documenting them and proselytizing them to the world and being very excited about it, even if you have a sore throat. And that makes it easy to show up at work on a Monday morning. And as an outro, yeah, so this is me. You can email me at, oh yeah, so there's Eamon had a question about how to pronounce my name. My last name is actually pronounced Moots, but I can also go by Mook or Muck. It's totally fine. It's lost in translation kind of issue, but it's totally fine. Cool, and I think we have a few minutes for questions. There we go.
What are you wearing in this photo? It's all washed out, I can't see.
I was touring an industrial museum in Prague, and it's something that people would wear in the metallurgy place, yeah. And I thought I looked like a wizard.
Cool.
Any other questions? Besides what I'm wearing?
If you like repeating things, do you like automating the things you repeat?
Oh, that's very meta.
What's the motivation? When is the step you say, now I've done this often enough, it has to be
run
automatically?
Cool. You can save this in case follow-up. So I like the repetition so that I can learn, so that I can observe all the different things that happen through that repeated process. And yeah, I guess, yeah, to be fair, it's not about just repeating for the sake of repeating, because sometimes that is therapeutic work. I wouldn't want to do that all the time. But I do like the repetition because patterns emerge. Either failure modes emerge. You're like, oh, wow, it seems like 1 in 10 or 1 in 100 of these sort of result in this kind of thing. And so you look at the repetitive process, whether it's manual or automated, through some kind of probabilistic means. You're like, okay, now that I've seen enough samples, I can reason about it. Now, does that mean I actually enjoy doing it manually? Not really. I think it does. It just means that I feel a little bit more confident in any solutions that we build. That's sort of where I really enjoy the repetition. It helps fight sometimes the premature solutioning to see the problems more and more and more. All right, anyone else?
I don't have a
You have to speak into the microphone.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment.
Okay.
One of the things that you said at the beginning really, I think, was impactful for me was, like, we talk about building so much, like in every room that I've been to, we talk about like innovating and changing and moving fast and breaking fast. Like when you pick up a story and you're done, like you enjoy it when you finish it, but then that's it, you know, you don't, I feel like me personally, I don't wait enough to see the, you know, to see the benefits of it. It's like you're moving on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And if I'm doing that, like there is a lot of something to be said about empathy here too, about like what we are putting out there and the clients and our customers are using it, right? So you're just like constantly putting something new on them,
Yeah.
and they have to adapt to that change whether they want it or not, because I feel that's how we perceive it. Like if you're not moving fast, if you're not like changing constantly, you're not really moving forward.
No, that's definitely resonates with me, is that I felt like I was on this change treadmill, and I realized it doesn't have to be like that. You can adjust your timelines. And so like that fractal nature of the graph is like, well, figure out what your timeline is something that fits for you as well. Because yeah, you can fit in different timelines with that fractal work. So there is something about reaping the mistakes of your previous implementations as well, like not living long enough, that's morbid, but like being the consumer of your own product for enough time to realize like, oh, that decision that we made, I don't know, a year ago, this is the impact now. And you sort of see that a lot more with maintenance. And it gets, the repetitive part is almost like an amplifier. And so repetition is really interesting to just sort of see those tiny sort of annoyances magnify over time through that repetition. I like your question now, because I realize that repetition is that I don't like the repetition. I like the learnings from repetition, is I think now the more way my model's thinking now. Okay. All right. If there's no more questions. Okay, we're done. Thank you.